everybody's an environmentalist because they live in the environment. You could spend 12 lifetimes and you really wouldn't understand what's outside. We have a crisis. It's not a climate crisis. It's a human crisis. A relationship, understanding, greed, violence, power. There's a whole list there. That's the crisis. Warming is the symptom. And I just suggest that there's another way of looking at time in our passage, and that can be imbued with grace and kindness and patience and understanding as to what other people are experiencing. But it doesn't mean we have to do that.
Hey everybody, this is Neil Pasricha, and welcome back to chapter 157, 7 of 3 books. Yes, this is the only podcast in the world by and for book lovers, writers, makers, sellers, and librarians. We are on a 22-year-long quest to uncover and discuss the 1,000 most formative books in the world. Today, like every day that we launch a new chapter, we will be talking about 3, hence the name of the show, 3 books. Did you read a lot over the holidays? Did you read much in January? As always on the show, there is no book guilt, no book shame. The world right now is conspiring against reading. I was talking to somebody high up at Hudson News, the airport bookstore that's in all the airports, and they were talking about how the square footage on books has shrunk to like a quarter of the size it was even 10 years ago. And I was like, well, what are you replacing it with? And she's like, candy, chips, and cell phone covers. Cell phone covers were taking over the place you buy books before you get on the plane, with accoutrements for a cell phone and candy to eat while we watch and imbibe the constant streaming of whatever it is that we're downloading before the plane. I know it's harder to read. It is harder. That's why we have a show dedicated to the art, to the science, to the sort of push us that we all need to kind of get to reading. As Casey Neistat once said, reading a book next to a phone with TikTok is like trying to eat a kale salad next to an ice cream sundae. So, reading is a challenge, but it shouldn't be a chore. After you're done reading, you should feel stimulated, rewarded, learned on a different valence, on a different degree. That's, I hope, what will happen to you after you listen to this conversation with the one and only Paul Hawken, a dream guest for 3 books for many years, since I read his 2009 fabled commencement speech, one of those viral commencement speeches that's kind of been going around the internet forever. Back in 2009, he says, hey, you, the class of 2009, are going to have to figure out what it means to be a human being on Earth at a time when every living system is declining and the rate of decline is accelerating. Basically, civilization needs a new operating system. You are the programmers, and we need it within a few decades. So captivating is Paul's eminent ability to distill kind of the ancient wisdom of the earth into like the here and now, almost like a soundbite quality. He's 79, turns 80 this year, and he's got this compressed wisdom about him that you're going to hear, you're going to love. But just going to pause in his bio for a second in some of the learnings to interrupt the opening with what we always do, which is a letter. We always feature a letter. This chapter's letter comes from Joe B., who's talking about Jonathan Franzen, our guest last year. This is an absolutely amazing interview, Neil. I can't believe I only just saw it. I love Franzen, but he's an intimidatingly clever guy, and he can be likably spiky at times. Check out his video about overrated novels as an example. But you seem to have charmed him. The breadth and depth of his answers are wider and deeper than usual. He's so fascinating. I can't believe this video only has 14,000 views. Good job. Also, I am English, and I can confirm that Turkish delight really is disgusting. It's basically perfume-flavored jelly, not the stuff you spread on toast, jam, that the Americans call Jell-O. Covered in chocolate. Don't listen to any vaguely negative comments, Neil, whether about you or Franzen. This is a treat. And then he goes on and on to say, by the way, not having adverts makes a huge difference. It's a massive relief not to have to listen to them, and lets us know your heart's in the right place. Yeah, I guess my heart's in the right place. No ads in books, no ads in book podcasts. I mean, I saw this viral tweet, like all caps, 1-sentence tweet, like a few weeks ago that's like, books are the best because they don't have ads. And everyone was retweeting it and liking it. It's true. Like, we're so slathered and bathed in the idea that we just have to watch this slurry of things yelling at us now that we just accept that. I do not accept that. You should not accept that. We got to find places and spaces that are ad-free. I think that's important. I like The Marginalian by our guest in chapter 138, is it? Maria Popova. And, The Marginalian is partly beautiful because it's like the Sesame Street model. You donate if you like it kind of thing. George Saunders' beautiful Substack story clubs kind of like that. Our guests in chapter 75. Of course, people like Peter Attia and Sam Harris are doing their podcasts like that, just like we are. So, yeah, it's a rare world right now, no ads, but it's something that we value. Joe B., thank you so much. As always, if you drop me a line, I would love to mail you a book of your choice to say thank you for the comment. And thank you for the letter. As always, write me a letter just by emailing me, neil@globalhappiness.org, or you can leave a comment on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or anything like that, too. I will pick it up. Now, Mr. Paul Hawken, like I said, he is like an elder statesman, I think my friend Rich Roll called him. And if you haven't already done so, Paul's interviews with Rich Roll are really wonderful. He's done a couple of them over the years. Paul wrote the wonderful book Regeneration, How to End the Climate Crisis in One Generation. He has this big viral video where he's interviewed by Bill Maher. And, Bill Maher is like, hey, Paul, what makes your plan to end the climate crisis different? And he's like, not only is it different, Paul's like, I have the only one. Like, everyone's trying to slow down the amount of carbon we release. Why don't we reverse it? The new book that he wrote, Carbon, is a deep, dense, compressed form of ancient wisdom talking to us through the earth, through the mycelium, through the trees, through the plants. And it will give you a sense of being alive on earth 200,000 or 300,000 years into our species' existence, pretty fresh. 2 or 3 millions of years into, I guess, Homo erectus existence, still pretty fresh, with this grand understanding of what's happening here on our planet and how we can be more involved. Paul Hawken, he doesn't like the term environmentalist, although most people call him an environmentalist, but he says, if you live in the environment, you are an environmentalist. Don't create this bifurcation where if you label someone an environmentalist, you're saying they're not, a feminist or they're not, something else. Don't use labels. Don't use jargon. Big message from Paul. Don't use jargon to obfuscate, I think is his word, kind of clarity. But for sure, he is an entrepreneur. For sure, he is an author. For sure, he is an activist. Did you know he's born in 1946, and at age 19, he was already the press coordinator for Dr. Martin Luther King during the Civil Rights Movement? He's going to tell us a harrowing story about being kidnapped by the Ku Klux Klan. Listen, as we're going to talk about that. I mentioned Carbon. I put that in my best of 2025 books. Go over to neil.blog if you want and check out my best of 2025, the top 20 books I read last year. You can sign up for my book club if you're interested. And other books he's written that are wonderful include Drawdown, Regeneration, Blessed Unrest, The Ecology of Commerce, The Next Economy, and Growing a Business. He serves on a ton of boards, a lot of environmental organizations. He's got 6 honorary doctorates, which is a lot for those that don't know. We're going to talk about how nature cooperates instead of competes, why fighting climate change may be the wrong metaphor, why the climate crisis is really a human crisis, how jargon disconnects, what decades of activism have taught Paul Hawken about being human. This is a conversation that has stuck with me. I really think of Paul as a sage of sages. I hope you agree. It will warm up. So if it takes 5 or 10 minutes to kind of get into this, be patient because we warm up. It goes deeper and deeper and deeper. He's a profound thinker. Please enjoy this conversation with the one and only Paul Hawken. Let's flip the page into chapter 157. Okay, we should be good. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Neil.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I have been looking forward to talking to you for, I want to say years, but it feels like almost a millennia in a way, because through your work, I feel so connected to life on the highest possible scale. Your book, Carbon, the Book of Life, it touched me in a deep and meaningful way. I have so many quotes I've pulled out from it. I wondered if you could tell us where you are right now, because I know you live in a watershed with pileated woodpeckers.
Yes, I do. You don't see them often, but they're here because you can.
And you see the trees that they decimate probably more.
Yeah, you can hear them. Mostly redwoods, so they don't, woodpeckers have no luck on redwoods because there's no insects, but every so often they come to the pine and fir.
Yeah. So
They're
you were in
ancient.
Cascade Creek,
Yeah.
which is in California.
Yeah, it's a watershed off Mount Tamalpais, which is to the Miwok who lived here. It's called the Sleeping Maiden, the mountain. And if you get way back from it, from a distance, then it looks like a woman lying down on earth. So that's how I prefer. I mean, Tamalpais is a proper name in some ways, but people don't realize what the name stands for.
Wow. That's so similar because here in Ontario, there's a city called Thunder Bay, and they have something known as the Sleeping Giant, and it is similarly
Mhm.
from a distance the visage of a sleeping giant. It's a
Right,
you
yeah.
know oh, interesting connection. I've pulled a ton of quotes from Carbon. I wondered if I could just throw a few to you that
Uh-huh.
I've picked out as resonant to me, and then you could offer your reflections on them or expansion if you'd like.
Absolutely.
From page 3, Earth's climate is not breaking down as some would have it. However, it is changing faster than humans can adapt. If human-induced greenhouse gas emissions are not curtailed, civilization will be.
Simple. I mean, it's like, can we just get to the point and then move on? Because I feel like there's so much rhetoric, which is sort of, it doesn't obfuscate, but it's jargonizing the situation. And jargon is a good way to actually occlude understanding as opposed to generate understanding. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, beautiful. True. Agree completely. I mean, even today, as I woke up, the top story in the news is how Bill Gates is writing a big public letter sort of saying, there really isn't as much of a concern around climate change as people like him have originally suggested. And I thought, oh, this is interesting. He's going to take the conversation and move it that way.
Yeah, that kind of conclusion and understanding could only come and arrive at somebody who doesn't spend time outdoors, who is not a farmer, who doesn't really understand the function and the extraordinary variety of pollinators. What's happening to the oceans, what's happening to the dead zones, what's happening to, in other words, if you don't have the scope of understanding or the experience of being, for a long time in a natural world, whatever landscape that might be, and seeing the changes, having the capacity to see the changes as well, then you would look at, I think, so-called climate change. We'll get back to that term because that's just a silly term. It's more jargon. Um, but you see it then in very much in the eyes, in the mindset that created the problem.
Absolutely. You mentioned pollinators, you mentioned dead zones. On page 44, noise is increasing exponentially worldwide, a form of uncontrolled pollution unraveling the living world.
Yeah, it actually bespeaks that phrase. I'll go back a little bit. Sometimes, if I go back and look at my books, I discovered that oftentimes the last paragraph augurs the next book, and I didn't know it. Now, in this case, it's not the last paragraph at all, but the noise, human created noise. The next book is about the 3.4 trillion Earthmates that are here with us, creatures. And one thing we don't understand, beginning to understand it very well, is just a whole raft and bevy of new scientists out there doing marvelous work. But all 3.4 trillion creatures are communicating all the time. In other words, they're talking. We use the word talk, that's our verb, but not theirs. They don't have verbs in that sense. In that sense, they do actually. And we don't listen to it. We don't hear it. We'll hear a bird. We'll hear, a cry of a wolf or coyote, or something. We do hear sounds, but actually just a tiny, tiny fraction of the communication is occurring constantly, every second on Earth. And so, Neil, I'm writing a book, and the subtitle is "Leadership is Hearing All the Voices." And we don't hear all the voices at all. We don't even hear each other anymore, for goodness sakes. Much less creatures and things that are speaking in I wouldn't say language, but in ways that we cannot understand. Like, for example, because of Adam Askey's work at the Royal Society, and along with Toby Kears and Giuliano Ferci and others. Anyway, we know that mycelia speak in a clicking sound, like the sun people do that, right? And so do sperm whales. It's like Morse code almost, click, click. Different shades of click, but in packets. That's Morse code for us. But they speak in Morse code in a way, and there's this clicking sound that occurs in packets. And then Adamski's work is saying, well, these packets are repeating themselves, and then they're also in sequences that repeat, which is like a sentence. And so we know that. So the mycelia, are basically connected to every hyphae. That is that root tip, with the mycelia in the world. And the plants and the mycelia are communicating. Now, how they're communicating, we don't know. But they are definitely communicating, because the plant has got sugar, carbohydrates. The average plant puts about 30% of its photosynthesized sugar in its roots. Okay. So it's legal tender. For what? For who? For mycelia and bacteria. And the plant wants to keep bacteria there because they feed it and they change the environment. But mycelia have this ability to give it, the plant, or to really exchange with the plant, nitrogen and phosphorus, but also selenium and zinc and strange things like that. And so every millisecond, a plant is in a transactional mode in the earth, mycelia, and that's communication. We have no idea.
Yeah.
And, and I'll stop here, but I'm just saying is that our idea of communication, memory, and all that sort of stuff depends on a central nervous system. And they don't have one. So that's, for us, is kind of like, oh, they couldn't be doing this. They couldn't be doing this. They couldn't be doing that based on what we think communication and intelligence is. We have to revisit that one in a big way.
Well, that's kind of reminds me of what you say on page 30. In school, we were taught that life is a competitive struggle. The word cooperation was not mentioned in science class and was seldom seen in school. We were graded on a curve, not as a team. We were taught Darwin, not St. Francis. Playground insults, cattiness, hazing, and the occasional pummeling verified the classroom tutorial. In the background was the nightly news detailing convulsions of regional wars and economic tumult. Yet I never saw conflict in the apple trees that creak by my house, or amongst the crows that gossiped at dusk in the pines.
Yeah. I mean, that's the world we live in. If we actually just slow down and take a look and listen, it doesn't mean that there isn't conflict for territory, for, you can think of different animals, but they're rarely in conflict on a steady state. They don't, in a sense, it's not a cultural attribute. It's a food attribute, when food is scarce, and they'll fight for it for sure. But, but the living world is extraordinarily cooperative. Cooperative actually is kind of a small term for what they're doing, because exquisitely interactive and symbiotic is probably the better description of the living world. And I think human beings have done that too and do that. Human beings can be amazing. I'm not trying to put human beings down and exalt animals or creatures. I'm just saying is that that's not what we see right now, and that's not what we're taught. And so much of our education comes from the North, from the West, the European, the scientific revolution, and we take it for granted as being the highest level of understanding and so forth. And so in that process, we marginalize cultures that have been here 10, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 years who seem to have got it right when it comes to communication for sure, but, socialization, how they listen, how they work together, because they wouldn't be here if they hadn't. That's for darn sure. And so there's a lot of available learning for us there, which we have always looked down on from the West, for a long, long time, until recently. And I think that's changing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I was struck by the sentence you say in Carbon where, 6% of the world's population today is the diaspora of our, nomadic hunter-gatherer ancestors, in the form of what we call today our indigenous peoples across the world. And
Right.
I don't know why I never married those two thoughts together, but it was one of, every page in this book is like, what? And you continue to do that. I could keep going. The last one I just want to put onto you is page 185. So now we're near the end of the book. And it was just something that it made me think of my conversation with Jonathan Franzen, who, one of his most formative books was one of the books of Narnia. And in one of the books of Narnia, there's this sort of meeting of animals
Yeah.
that he, as a lonesome, adolescent, was thought of as a friendship and as kin. And then on page 185, you say, I once walked on the unceded land of the Wampanoag, I probably said that wrong,
Yeah.
Wampanoag near Cape Cod, following a winding, unused dirt road. As I rounded a bend, 7 animals faced each other in a circle. It appeared to be a meeting, like a council.
Right.
I froze. So did they. For a moment, there was a hognose snake, a box turtle, a possum, a rabbit, a white-footed mouse, a meadow vole, and 2 bobwhite quail. I couldn't believe what I'd seen. I checked their tracks. They were there. People who spend time in nature have experiences for which there is no logical explanation.
Right. If you spend enough time outdoors in different environments, absolutely that will happen.
Yeah. I find that happens all the time. Like, I just got into birding 5 years ago and, I sleep with my windows open and, I'm like, oh, why do all the squirrels kind of go up into the trees? And they're always kind of clicking at night and there's a territorial. And I was kind of typing with ChatGPT and to explore this and like, it has no idea. It has no real understanding that they do this. And I'm like, well, I see it every day. Like, what's happening here? And I realize like so much of what's out there is just not captured in what we're trying to do with zeros and ones and data right now, and of course, birders see this all the time. Look, you are described many different ways in many different places. Your own website, of course, says that Paul Hawken explores the connection between nature and commerce, working with leaders and CEOs in ecological regeneration. Of course, that's the title of one of your books. This wonderful website, this great resource. But then I also think, most people might enter and meet you, as they do on the front page of the internet through Wikipedia. And the 5 descriptors there that immediately follow your name are, in order, environmentalist, entrepreneur, author, economist, and activist. And I thought I might just ask you is that how you define yourself? And if not, and how would you define those words? Environmentalist, entrepreneur, author, economist, activist. That's how you are labeled on the central channel of Wikipedia.
I never look at Wikipedia, so thank you for sharing. And I don't write it, of course. I have no idea. I think I've written about economics for sure. The Next Economy, that was the book. That doesn't make me an economist. So that's sort of a jump, a real leap forward. And so I think, activists, yes, of course. I did direct action, both in the civil rights movement and environmental movement. So what the entrepreneur, yes, I've created business.
Yeah.
That's true. What are the other two I'm missing?
Environmentalist and author. And I wanted to just you to both just define environmentalist for us today.
I can't. That's not a word I would use. I would shed that one. It's an ism, you know. I would never say I'm an environmentalist, you know, as opposed to what? As it contrasted to, as, you know, I mean, and I understand why people use that word, you know, but it's also a word of separation
Yeah.
and isolation. Oh, those people are environmentalists. Well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
It means they don't care about, you know, children and you know, the plight of women. And, you know, I mean, there's so many social issues, you know, in terms of the rate of disease occurring in the United States due to ultra-processed foods. And they don't care about how Pepsi, Coca-Cola et al. Are doing everything they can, you know, to make people addicted to non-food. Basically, it's non-food. And et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, there's so many aspects of human endeavor and human civilization that we encounter and we deal with. And but everybody's an environmentalist because they live in the environment, you know. So,
I like that. Everyone's an environmentalist because they live in the environment. We're catching you on your 80th spin around the sun.
right.
You mentioned the civil rights movement. For those that just don't know, it's pretty astounding that, of course, at age 19, I think, in 1965, you were the press coordinator for Martin Luther King Jr. Like, you know, actually having clashes with the Ku Klux Klan, being, I think, um, rescued or intervened with by the FBI, if I read that
Well,
properly.
they didn't rescue me until I was kidnapped. So, I mean, that's why. Otherwise, they
But
wouldn't
you
have.
took photos of the Ku Klux Klan members who had kind of murdered three of the activists in the civil rights movement, I believe.
I don't know who I photographed. What happened is after Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman, the three civil rights workers were tortured and killed and buried, and then discovered, of course, somehow. And the FBI was all over it, you know, and Mississippi. And John Doerr, who was from the Justice Department, got an injunction against the Klan that they could no longer march with their hoods. And so the first time they didn't do that, and this is all in Meridian, Mississippi, where sort of the epicenter of all this, they were going to march without their hoods. And somebody where I worked at the Congress of Racial Equality in New Orleans, I was a photographer, said, anybody want to go photograph this? I said, sure, you know, I'll do it. And that's when I was quickly kidnapped, if you will, or abscond, you know, thrown into a car and driven out of town. And what was so remarkable about that experience was that I don't know how far we got out of town before the car I was in was, you know, just pulled off. No, I mean, a car next to it just pushed it off the road. And there was 4 guys in that car. There's 3 guys in mine, and they were like, you know, and I go, oh, this is getting worse. Being kidnapped from the kidnappers. And but you know, Neil, I just remember so distinctly the driver of the car that pushed us off the road got out, turned to the driver of the car I was in, and said, God darn it, Jimmy, I told you we couldn't do this shit no more. I'm going, what? And they obviously knew each other. They probably played football. They were in high school. They knew each other. Who knows what they did together? You know, I don't even want to know. But that car was FBI deputized or somehow, you know, and they knew they grew up with these Klansmen, you know. I mean, and then they took me out of the car, threw me in there, and drove me back to town, and I was put in jail for disturbing the peace. But I think the cultural thing about that is how deeply embedded racism and violence was in that culture, sanctified, really almost sanctioned, and maybe not sanctified, but sanctioned for a long, long time. And it just gave me another dimension of understanding, what happened to the people from the Atlantic Passage that came over from Western Africa and how they had been treated for hundreds and hundreds of years, And I was nothing. I was just an irritant, really. But just that little kind of opening, of seeing the cultural pathology, uh, act itself out on the highway again.
Wow, what an astounding life you were living. We're flashing from today back to 19. And of course, before age 19, you were kind enough to share 3 books that you read that had a disproportionate effect on your life. I've bought the books. I've tried my best to read them. I made it through one of them. I flipped through another, but I'm kind of like immersing myself in these books. I wondered if we might start, and I'll just explain the book to our listener. Well, since most people will be listening to this rather than watching it, I want people to picture, standing in a bookstore and you're holding this book in your hand with Paul and I kind of standing next to you. The first one here, of course, is Go Tell It on the Mountain by James Baldwin, published in 1953 by Alfred A.
Yeah.
Knopf Publishing. This is James Baldwin's first book, the novel he says he had to write. I wish I had an old cover, but mine is a 2013 vintage paperback edition.
Yeah, it's
Um,
beautiful. Yeah.
yeah, it has a young black boy in a white t-shirt standing against a wooden wall near a high-rise window, which I assume is supposed to be 1930s Harlem, looking sad, kind of gazing down. James Baldwin is in tall, skinny, all-caps sans serif in white and in a diagonal black ribbon with the small caps Go Tell on the Mountain in green cloudscape just below. James Baldwin lived from 1924 in New York City. He died in 1987 in France at age 63. He is the novelist, essayist, playwright, and civil rights activist known for his insightful explorations of race, sexuality, and class. This is his powerful autobiographical novel about faith, family, and identity taking place in 1930s Harlem and beyond. Paul, please tell us about your relationship with Go Tell It on the Mountain by James Baldwin.
Well, it's one of the books I read as so I didn't stop there. And it was a time when the civil rights movement was emerging. I grew up in Berkeley, California. And so my father worked in the library, and so I was, Bill's kid, as they called me in the library, but I had a free run of the library and all the different libraries at the University of California. And but I really wanted to understand the civil rights movement in a deeper way, and and Baldwin was just such an extraordinary writer, and he did write about his sexuality and about what it was like. He wrote about how dysfunctional his family was too, but to me, it was obvious that he was becoming a voice, for the Black community that was poetic. Can turn a sentence really well. And so to me, it was just like an aperture, that opened up. And was I gay? No, I wasn't a gay man. So it wasn't like an identification with respect to his sexuality, but it was a reading of what happened to him because of his sexuality and because of his color. And so he's like a twofer, he experienced incredible amount of discrimination, because of both aspects. And then also self-hate, because he didn't fit in at all. And I think for me, it was, I could identify that last part. I didn't feel like I fit into this society, this culture. I wasn't Black, I wasn't gay. It doesn't matter. What matters is that I couldn't understand what was happening at that time in the world. in my city, I mean, I grew up in a very liberal city. Didn't make any difference. I didn't understand. Um, I was confused, and so I went to others who expressed their confusion in a way that I wanted to turn the page and read about it and understand and learn. And so that was Go Tell It on the Mountain. And I feel like that title is so interesting. I was thinking about talking to you, like going, well, it's more apropos now than ever was. We need to go tell it on the mountain, and it's such a beautiful phrase from Black spirituals, that phrase. And we need to go tell it on the mountain because we're listening to the wrong voices completely, politically, sociologically, social media, I mean, to me, the press, the Post, the Times, all these other things are really shut down. They do really, really good research on certain subjects, but they are conforming. They are in fear. They are newspapers that do not want to cross Donald Trump, the president, the new proto-fascist in history. And so, even then, where do you go for insight, for information, for understanding, And we need more and more people who go tell it on the mountain.
And then listen to the mountain. You were in Berkeley, California. I know at 19, you've already mentioned you were in Mississippi. I know when you spoke to our mutual friend, Rich Roll, who's a former guest on the show as well. We love Rich here.
Yeah.
You told him that you lived in Nevada City as well, and that you were taken in by a family there. Was that after this book, or I'm missing a piece of the puzzle?
That was before. I was, my family, and go back a little bit. The reason I spent so much time outdoors is because it wasn't safe indoors in my family. Okay. It was not a safe place. And so outdoors was safe. And so that has carried forward with me for the rest of my life. I don't feel any threat. My uncle was a herpetologist, and he taught me how to handle snakes, including, okay, here's a rattlesnake. This is how you hold it. And okay, it makes sense, and so I always saw the outside as sort of a sacred, as a sanctuary, and the inside as a danger zone. So somebody in Nevada City who was an accountant and worked in different companies and so forth, and had a family there, asked if I would come live there so that his wife and daughter would be around a male figure. I was not a very formidable male figure, but when he was down in the Bay Area. So that's how I got to live in Nevada City. But then as now, I was just a voracious reader, voracious reader. But it was so great to have horses and to be out there in the wild on the river and all that sort of stuff. It was incredible. Yeah.
What beautiful. And thanks for coloring that in a little bit for me, because it was sort of mentioned as an aside with Rich, and I wanted to double click on it, but it was right near the end of one of your wonderful 2-hour chats with him. We talk about how you and we and us in this era need to kind of go tell it on the mountain. You talk about your comfort and connection with the outdoors. You are you've received 6, by my count, honorary doctorates and given a number of really well-known and quite viral commencement speeches. I wanted to ask you about the state and faith you have in humanity, and especially around young people. On page 53, a minor character in the book named Sister McCandles clucks on a night when nearly nobody shows up to church. She says, "The Lord ain't gonna bless no church what lets its young people get so lax. No, sir. He said, because you ain't neither hot or cold, I'm gonna spit you out in my mouth." That's the word. You, of course, have said in your 2009 commencement speech, civilization needs a new operating system. You are the programmers, and we need it within a few decades. You've always had a great knack for communicating across generations. You mentioned we need to go tell on the mountain. What do you say to younger generations today?
Well, I listen, as opposed to say, or state or know, I feel like when I was 14, 20, 30, whatever, when I was young, whatever, I didn't listen to very, very many people who wanted to tell me what I should know, what I should do. I just didn't. I was finding out myself. I was making it up as I went along. Now, look at it. There are people and cultures in which you really do have extraordinary elders, and you do listen to them, and you do learn from them, and you do pass on cultural almost tokens, but that have originate way, way back. And so I felt like I was a changeling, and that's Irish, I guess, term. It's an English word, but the idea of the fairies coming in at night, and taking a human child and then exchanging it for, one who's elvish. And then, the eldest child is the changeling, and she grows up and they're really confused about where they are and who they are. And so I always felt like a changeling in that sense. Like my parents didn't make any sense to me as human beings, nor did my relatives. With all due respect, certainly not my brother. I had a twin sister, but, so I always had this sense of like I really didn't belong here. And so at my age now, even more so, I don't feel like I have, I can write. I love to write. I love to share, but not in sort of a didactic, prose style, where listen up, I got something to tell you. I got something to share. I know so much. No, 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 no. It's really the opposite, which is, trying to open up areas for the reader that invoke or evoke really a sense of wonder and curiosity. And I think that comes from being outside, going back to that, like I was safe outside. Okay, well, but what's outside? And you could spend 12 lifetimes and you really wouldn't understand what's outside. And so, the sounds, the creatures, what's in the soil, all the things. They're red. Pyrocanthus, is that edible? Not really, but, birds get drunk on them. Just learning bit by bit by bit, where I was and how it worked. And I still feel like I'm in the same modality after all this time. So in that sense, very little has changed. What the only remarkable thing about me, I believe, is I'm intensely curious. And so curiosity is the desire to understand, to know, and that's on all levels of, life on Earth, and that includes us, Homo sapiens, but and that curiosity continues to this day, and it drives me. It's really behind all of the books I've written, and those books, the sequence of them, in a sense, is a map of my mindscape and how I expanded in some ways, in many ways, the scope of what it was that I was interested in.
Wow, how beautiful is that? And, I always think the outdoors has no ad campaign and no one telling you to do it. And there's never an interruption in your social media scroll telling you to go outside. I might just pause on the number of times you've talked about the outside and just to say to you, what are the ingredients of a great walk?
Well, the ingredients of a great walk are that you're finding your way. Okay. In other words, it's not the path itself. If there's a path, then it's a rough terrain. That's very helpful. But it is that you don't know where you're going. Even if you can see it on a map or a trail, or you can see a mountain. When I was in Bhutan, you can see Chomolhari. Well, you can see it from 50 miles away at 25,000 feet, snow covered. But if you look down and then looked, straight ahead for a while, you didn't know where it was going to take you. This river, this path, this trail. And so I think what a great walk is discovery. and appreciation, of course, and the delight and just being alive. It's like, to me, it's being totally alive in your present. You have to be present. You're gonna trip and fall if you don't. And then, but being alive in terms of the sound, and obviously not just the fauna, but the flora, and and actually even imagining, since most cases, you're walking where other people have walked. Sometimes it's animal trails, for sure, but sometimes it's both, and sometimes it's always both, actually. But it's always, but some more human than not. And when you do that, then in a sense you're in a flow of history. You're in a flow of movement, and all life is flow. It's not static. It moves all the time, whether it's the trillion molecules in every cell, or or the whole of the earth and everything, and the land and sea. Is always about movement and flow. So I think when you're walking, you're entering into a non-static relationship, and most of our relationship with nature is static. And yeah.
You're walking, you're entering into a non-static relationship. Most of our relationship is static. And I like how you said rough terrain helps.
Absolutely.
Which I live in downtown Toronto, and I cannot think of any rough terrain. I don't have any rough terrain around me, but it's just the idea that rough terrain helps makes a lot of sense. On page 132, Esther, who is one of my favorite characters in the book, her voice, as you said, Baldwin's writing really pops. She says, I'm going to take this quote a little out of context, but she says, I just want to go somewhere and have my baby and think all this out of my mind. I want to go somewhere and get my mind straight. That's what I want you to do. And that's pretty cheap. I guess it takes a holy man to make a girl a real whore. But just that phrase, I just want to go somewhere and think all this out of my mind. One thing I love about your work, in your speeches and in your books, is that you take this cascading fall of every living system globally, as you've said. Every living system globally is declining, right? Birds, insects, animals, clean water, clean air, it's all declining. And yet you are able to, at the same time, articulate a unique form of optimism that comes from your ability to connect and see people doing such great and meaningful work. And so I just wanted to ask you how you personally metabolize that emotion that a lot of us feel of environmental despair. There's something you're doing. Is it through your lens? Is it through your vision that you're seeing so much great stuff happening? A lot of people feel what you're feeling. I mean, one of Jonathan Franzen, not to bring him up again, but one of his formative books was called Reason in a Dark Time by Dale Jameson, why the climate movement failed, then the 50-year hit. And he said that was formative to him because it pushed him down that path of, okay, it's failed. Now what? He kind of went to the next step. And I wouldn't say he's an optimist, but I detect a lot more glimmers of optimism from you, and just wondered how you would talk to that specific emotion that a lot of people feel.
Well, working backwards from what you just said, I mean, I agree the climate movement has failed. No question about that. Now, let's be really careful here, because the movement, okay, and it does not criticize people and what they're doing, what they care about, and their effort and their sincerity. That's not what I'm talking about. I think as a movement, it failed because the narrative is upside down and backwards. And so facts don't change our minds, stories do. And the story from the climate movement, has been jargonized, and it's really a specialty language that very few people understand and speak. And that's why 99% of humanity is disengaged from climate. They may be very sympathetic, and they may want something to happen, and they may be very concerned about it. But on a daily basis, what do? Nothing. Yeah. In many cases, they can't. They're just based they're survival based. Okay, let's put that aside. But in most cases, in the West, from Europe and right across, to the United States, Canada, Japan, Korea, all those places where you have a fairly robust economy, they can do things and they don't. And they're busy, they're this, they're stressed. Going back to that quote from Esther, in a way, I just want to go somewhere. I mean, I just feel like, we have to step back and how are we talking to each other? Because, if you're having surgery and the doctors are using jargon, they go, hallelujah. They don't have time to do complete sentences, right? That's what jargon's for. But if you're talking about the fate of humanity, I think we need to slow down a little bit there and tell stories, and reach out and listen, because decarbonization, net zero, all these things are just not only are they jargon, but they're actually in many cases complete nonsense. Complete nonsense, and you can know what the intent is of the speaker, or somebody coined the term, but the intent doesn't matter. What matters is the word. And does the word make sense given where we are today? And in most cases, the jargon makes no sense whatsoever. I mean, you even have things like direct air capture, which sounds like, oh, what a brilliant thing. We'll just take this carbon back out of the air, suck it down 4 parts per 10,000. We're going to separate the C from the O. Here's the carbon. We'll put the O back out somewhere. We're going to liquefy the carbon, pump it in pipelines to geologic formations and put it down, 5,000 feet below the surface of the earth, and bury it. Okay. They can do that now. Okay. And billions are going into it. Bill Gates was one of the investors. Now, the problem with that is ninth grade science, which is called entropy, which is energy only goes one direction. And, and that's the second law of thermodynamics. I don't want to get scientists, I don't want to get on just speaking science, but the fact is, we all know that. Like an ice cold glass of lemonade is going to get warm, okay, in the room. We all know this, and what's happening is this direct air capture is using to suck the air from 4 parts per 10,000 of CO2, and then separate it, and then liquefy it, and then pump it, and this takes energy, a lot of energy. So the greenhouse gases that we are troubling us, CO2 being foremost, but also methane and others, are the result of entropy. That is to say, you burn coal, oil, gas. The ash is CO2. Okay, so you're in a sense trying to use entropy to cure entropy. And that is so laughable in terms of physics. It's like any ninth grader would say, why aren't you smoking? This is not physically possible. And yet we hear about it as being one of the ways that humankind, is going to save its ass. And excuse my talk about the dairy, but it's just like,
okay.
It's like, come on, So it goes back to the movement. So that kind of language, that kind of rhetoric, that kind of financing, that kind of belief is a belief. It's not actually factual in terms of what it will do for humanity and the earth and living creatures. That kind of thing plagues the climate movement. Now that's on the tech side. But there's also on just the activist side, we're going to what? Fight, tackle, combat climate change, just stop right there for a minute. First of all, those verbs are male verbs. Okay, very male. I'm not saying women can't fight, tackle, and combat, but I'm just saying is that that's how men think. First of all, that's Don Quixote. The fact is, climate, you can't fight it, you can't combat it, you can't tackle it. And so what you've done, Neil, is other climate. You've made it a thing that you can do things to fix. Is another male verb. And that thinking is the cause of global warming, othering nature, othering people, obviously, othering resources, othering the earth that we live upon, and then, and then it just goes out there to, oh, we're going to fix the climate. We're going to do this to the climate. We're going to combat it, tackle it. These sort of heroic imagery of complete nonsense, because the biosphere and the climate are absolutely inseparable. That's what creates the climate, is the biosphere. And again, just these basic understandings, that are just fact. Now, can we talk together? Can we share? Can we listen? Let's talk now. But we can't talk in a mindscape of untruth and BS and being right, for example. That doesn't help. So the climate movement has failed, no question about it. Now, it doesn't mean people out there aren't doing extraordinary things with respect to the biosphere and culture and people and place. They are. Yeah.
But when you talk about that despair, that feeling people have, and you're talking about how it's story based and jargon is partly pervasive. So where do we find these kind of lucid, clear voices?
They're everywhere. They're everywhere. We just don't listen to them. We listen to the people who have the microphone, who have the New York Times editorials. We listen to the people who are running these companies. We listen to Silicon Valley saying, oh, we're going to fund climate tech. We're listening to the wrong people. Not the wrong people. We're not listening to the people who actually have these clear, resonant, beautiful, extraordinary minds and voices on Earth. And they're here. They are here. But you don't read them in the New York Times. You don't read them.
Are you talking about a lot of the indigenous cultures that you referenced throughout your book?
I'm including that, but I'm not limiting that to that. There's farmers and there's activists all over the world that we don't know about, that we don't hear. We don't hear their voice, and they're barely recognized. Every so often, they get an award or something. And oh yeah, that's great, But we did a lot of work with Greta Thunberg, and just, but I'm sorry. There are so many other people besides Greta Thunberg, and yet the media say, oh, it's a perfect, thing. She's, sat on the steps with her sign, and we want to honor her for sure, for her courage and bravery, but then to make her kind of the archetype
because humans, we can't focus on too much stuff, so we have to simplify it down to like one name or face and one key point. And you're a keynote speaker, I'm sure you're told all the time, make it simple, Paul. Have 3 key takeaways for us. Talking to farmers and indigenous communities is not something that's easy for a lot of people to do,
right? But what's missing here is farmers talking to farmers, okay? Students talking to students, indigenous people talking to indigenous people, and they hope that we would listen who are not indigenous, but we are not part of the conversation if we're city-bound activists, who are jargonized and by what I call the pseudo-climate movement, it's like not really. That's why we have the highest rate of carbon emissions after 50 years. After 50 years, by the time last year was the highest, number 1.
And it never stops going up. And as you pointed out, or I think it was actually Dale Jameson's book that pointed it out to me, that, this is something that John F. Kennedy said in his inauguration speech was a massive issue then. And I think you've said before, every minute since, we've increased our net output of greenhouse gas emissions to our own detriment.
Right.
Every minute since.
Right.
And so in some ways it was sad for me to read, Ending the Climate Crisis in One Generation, your book Regeneration, because a lot of the dates and times you're talking about, of course, this book is not that old, right? Published in 2021, but a lot of the dates you're talking about are like by 2030, and I'm like, oh crap, now we're talking 2025, 2026. Like we're 5 years into this book, and it's only gone worse.
Yeah, but what the subtitle is, Ending the Climate Crisis in One Generation, isn't the crisis. It's the crisis of our thinking, the crisis of our mind, the crisis of our belief. That's what we can end in one generation, is the complete insanity with which the climate, and let's put climate aside. Climate is perfect. It always will be. That's not the problem. The problem is heating. It's warming. That's the problem, and so forth. And I wanted to put global warming in the cover, and the publishers didn't. They wanted a crisis. Okay. But that's what I'm talking about. Not like, hey, I've got all the tools, I got the techniques, I got the solutions, listen up. If you do this, this, and this, we're good to go in one generation. No, we're good to go in one generation if we actually relate to each other in the living world in a completely different way. And that's what regeneration's about.
Mm-hmm. Hey, I heard I'm Canadian. One of the most famous Canadian actors in this space, I won't say environmentalist, is David Suzuki.
David, yeah.
And he often says, we mistake economy for ecology. And he talks about that root word of eco, and how we have superseded economy over ecology in our minds and in our society. And he says we have to prioritize ecology over economy, and that is the tip he talked about. I mean, I'm talking about a speech I heard him give maybe 10 years ago.
Right.
But when you talk about it at a high level, climate is fine and it always will be. I mean, that's not a phrase that I think most people have heard before.
Well, it has no choice. It's not like climate is volitional. It's
Volitional?
It doesn't choose. I mean, it doesn't have desires. It's not animate, although on a higher level, that would be an interesting discussion. But I mean, and so we have to stop. We have a crisis. I couldn't agree more. It's not a climate crisis. It's a human crisis. Of relationship, understanding, greed, violence, power. There's a whole list there. That's the crisis. Warming is the symptom.
Yeah, exactly. How do you see things playing out?
I have no idea. I have no idea. At this point, especially with the new administration in the United States, with the giant leap backwards, not to say that were the policies of the Biden administration and continued, that would be sufficient unto the day. They would not be, but they would certainly at least be directionally correct. Let's go this way instead of that way. And so I don't know how it's going to work out. I feel, but let me share something with you. Okay. And so your listeners will be the first to hear about this. You can't go online and see it yet. Okay. So it's going to be online. And it's called the Alliance for Earth. Okay. The Alliance for Earth. And you can go to a splash page, the Alliance for Earth, and go look at it. And what you'll see is a mandala, and what you'll see is a phrase that said, the way you heal a system is to connect more of it to itself, coming soon. And then on the upper right-hand corner, you'll see 105 languages. In which you can read that in 105 different languages. All right. Now, who cares about reading that in different languages? But actually, it's there for a reason, which is that what it will do, or pretends to do, what we're trying to create, is to bring together. Think that there's an extraordinary amount of work and people and efforts all over the world to not only reverse global warming, but actually to, restore the earth and all its manifestations and cultures and people, and to take care of each other. And that sounds so wishy-washy, except when you understand the number of organizations that do that around the earth right now is quite extraordinary. You never hear about them. You don't read them. Occasionally they pop up here and there, but, but otherwise you don't. Where this came from, Neil, was, in the Sierras, I was a caretaker at this ranch in Nevada City. And there, you get fires. California's fire ecology. It's a fire state. You're always going to have fires, whether people set them or not. And like in the Pacific Palisades in LA, that was a human-made fire. But there's always going to be fires. And so in those places in California and so forth, you're all volunteer fire people. That is to say, fire, and the community gets together, and they put on their metal soled boots and this and that, and they have equipment maybe at the firehouse, and you're taught to not fight fires downwind and things, basics go that way. And anyway, eventually the fires go out, and then you tamp it down to make sure there's no manzanita embers there. They could light up the fire in the middle of the night with the wind. And then it's out, you go home, shower, all that sort of stuff. Okay. But in the spring, and everybody, I think, been around a fire has seen this, and, you get this beautiful explosion of grass. Right. And the color of the grass is so exquisite. And why? Because that grass seed is fed by the ash, the minerals in the ash. It's a highly fertilized grass. And the human brain really can see more colors of green than any other color. Red, blue, don't even hold the candle to green. Why is that? Well, because plants have been important to us since we were, sedge and moss. I mean, for the 420 million years, life has been on the planet, on land, green was a tell, a signal, and so we have that ability still, to look at green. Okay. Then, there was a fire in Berkeley at Oakland, and eucalyptus trees, a really hot fire. And I think 200 or 300 homes were destroyed. And I was just coming back from Bhutan, and I was reading about it. And then I wasn't there. But then I noticed that botanists were saying, we're seeing wildflowers that we haven't seen for 75 or 100 years.
Wow.
I'm going, what? How? That was scorched, I mean, eucalyptus burns really hot. And what they pointed out when queried said that's called fire-triggered succession, that there are seeds that are in the soil that require heat, not directly on them, but surrounding them, above them, for the carapace to flake off, be removed, and to germinate. It's how beautiful these plants are so adaptive. They'll just wait 50 years, we'll wait 100 years, and then we'll show up again, and then we'll have bloom seeds, and we'll put them back in the ground. And what I think we're seeing right now is fire-triggered succession. The world is on fire, literally, in every other way you can think of it. It's self-immolating, it's burning itself, it's destroying itself, and I say it being humanity, okay? But what we don't see is that simultaneously there's fire-triggered succession. And there's hundreds of thousands of communities and co-ops and land trusts, and so many different ways to describe the body to use, and scientists that are working on the restoration, the revival, the regeneration, the restoration of life on Earth. They're here, and they are multitudinous in ways that are mind-boggling. So the Alliance, what is going to try to do is be a website that makes itself. In other words, it's not like somebody's in charge. I mean, obviously, they'll be technically in charge, to make sure it works. But that is that it will have the organizations, inside, inside it. Okay. And then you can search, and you can search because it'll have agentic AI within it, so you can go in and say, I want to know about people in Botswana who are working on reforestation. Good question. Who's that? I don't know. It'll be there. And, but it'll be there in maybe a different language. Maybe you're querying in English. It can come back. In other words, you can take whatever information is out there and read it in your native language. And it'll show the website. It'll have scraped it. It'll show the citation, where it is and who it is, and the science or the people or the communities or the indigenous and whoever is part of it. And that way, a teacher, say, is told to teach climate, and well, what do I know? And then she can go there and start to ask questions, how do I teach? How do I do this? What does this mean? So forth. And she can be in Somalia, she can be in Chile, she can be anywhere in the world. She can ask it in her native language, and she'll get it back in her native language, or she can convert it if it comes back in English. And then, in the midst of all this is going to be what's called the Earth Oracle. And that Earth Oracle, again, is AI for sure, but it's agentic. It's there, it can't go anywhere. And it's not trying to figure out what the rest of the world is doing. It's just showing what is happening on the Alliance. And it's really important, I think, for people to understand that humanity is on the case. They really are. Us. And you, you can read the New York Times until you're blue in the face, and the Guardian and the Post and FT and, all these papers, Perry Mach. And, you can read and listen, watch, hear, see, and stay away from social media. But, and you'll never know that this is true. Isn't this fascinating that the greatest human movement in history is right there underneath, not underneath, but hidden, occluded, and we can't see it. It's here. So that's what the Alliance for Earth is about. And again, you put your own organization. We have a place for podcasts. Okay, that's a category. It's a really important category. Look at you and Rich, and you can name a whole bunch of podcasters. Rachel Donald. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. They're amazing, amazing people. Podcasts, and their guests are amazing too.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it's another one in a series of really inspiring and kind of collectively convulsing projects that you kind of have done throughout your life. I'm inspired by it, and I'm excited to see that launched, the Alliance for Earth. We've gone down into Go Tell It on the Mountain by James Baldwin. I wondered if we could just sort of tip over to one of your other formative books. And I thought we might introduce people to Look Homeward, Angel by Thomas Wolfe. Not to be confused with Tom Wolfe, the guy that wrote Bonfire of the Vanities and Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test and stuff. This guy actually lived only 37 years, from 1900 in Asheville, North Carolina, to 1938 over in Maryland. 2 novels published during his lifetime and 5 published after he died. I have, once again, a newer paperback cover, but the original cover is kind of these angular color and motion shards of red and fuchsia and orange type of bursts. I don't know if that's the version you originally read, perhaps. Yeah. With an Art Deco kind of all caps says "Look Homeward, and then Angel." It's a coming-of-age story of Eugene Gant in the fictional mountain town of Altamont, North Carolina, from his birth in 1900 to his departure at 19, exploring formative experiences shaping his identity, passions and conflicts in his family, bittersweet beauty at first love, and the awakening of his artistic dreams. This guy is a very unique writer. He's what people call rich lyrical prose, just these long, stringing, hanging sentences that bring to life the vibrant characters and rugged landscapes of Altamont, while probing the universal struggles of belonging and individuality. You can follow this one, Dewey Decimal Messenger 813.52 for American fiction in English, 1900 to 1945. Paul, would you tell us about your relationship with Look Homeward, Angel? by
No,
Thomas Wolfe.
his entire work of I read. um, One is he's just a hell of a writer.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
really is. It
yeah,
really is. It's
and just
stunning prose.
yeah, it's stunning. And for me, when you read something like that, at least for me anyway, so forth, your brain cells change. In other words, your capacity to understand, to speak, to parse, to discern changes because it's coming right at you and going into your neurons. That's not a,
Literally, yeah.
yeah,
As you put it, yeah.
yeah. Number two, his story, I felt I could identify with it. Not exactly, especially when he was in New York and stuff, but I actually started reading it when I was in New York and waiting for a freighter to take me to Europe, a coal freighter from Norfolk News. And so I had no place to stay. The cheapest place was the Y in New York, also the most dangerous place for a young boy, by the way. Uh,
Really?
oh, yeah. You had to be in your room at 6:37 because of all the predators, sexual predators at the Y. It was just
Oh my gosh.
open season on boys for older men. You couldn't take a shower except during the middle of the day. You got your takeout food, got it in, put it in your room, and locked the door. And so, I would start reading, I don't know what time, early in the evening and be reading right into 2, 3 a.m., and book after book after book. I was just gobbling up this stuff. And so, so he just, it's hard to say what his influence was, or what the influence of those books were, except I do remember just gobbling them up at a very influential age in my
Yeah, exactly. That's the definition of formative, to the point where it's shifted you in ways that you can't really see
yeah,
anymore.
yeah. Yeah, I was, it just opened up my eyes and, um, he's always very poor and getting by, he's scrambling.
Yeah, well, I wonder if one thing you got from him, and I don't know if you did or not, but he has this ability to conceptualize time on these vast scales that not many
Mm.
people have. Like, one of the quotes from this book is, "Each of us is all the sums he has not counted. Subtract us into the nakedness and night again, and you shall see begin in Crete 4,000 years ago the love that ended yesterday in Texas."
Yeah. Like who?
And that type of stuff, you do that. I mean, in the book Carbon, I was like stunned by your illuminating the metaphor of the Mahakalpa.
The Mahakapa, yeah.
Nalakalpa, the amount of time it would take a pigeon to like wipe a silk sheet over the top of a mountain higher than Everest down to dust, was like you were using that as a metaphor for time. You use all you just said earlier, like the trillion atoms of carbon that are in each of your brain cells.
Any cell.
You're doing this part in each cell. You're doing this high flying like gymnastics all the time, and it's really vertiginous and exciting. And ultimately, it gets to, I think a lot of it gets to the root of our own existence. That famous Einstein quote that you kind of close your book with Einstein saying, the biggest question we have to ask ourselves is whether the universe is friendly or not.
Yeah.
Which is like, I still don't think I understand it, Obviously, I'm no Einstein, but what is happening here with your time scales, and what are you trying to say in terms of where we are and when we are? And I think this is partly what you even opened the book with, which I said at the very beginning of this conversation. The Earth's going to be fine, guys. It's just that we won't make it. It's kind of what you, that's again like a separation of time that kind of hits you in the head like, oh, it's just the Earth's fine.
Right.
It's just us.
Yeah. One of the teachings in Hinduism is periods of time that time compresses. That sounds so weird, because compression is a physical thing and time is not physical. But and it's kind of like an ice skater, who is twirling, and when she or he brings their arms closer to their body, they spin faster and faster and faster, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
of course. I mean, I can picture that from
Yeah,
the
well,
Olympics. Yeah.
yeah, in Hinduism, is that we have a period where time gets speeded up, and this is a cycle, just and we're in that time, and it's speeding up, and it's very hard to get your bearings when time is so fast. At the end of the day, you go, oh, wow, that was someday, but I got to get up and I'm going to do this and this. I mean, you just feel it, and read it, and so to me, the Mahakabha really was a story of cyclicality. That this idea that the universe was born. It was an explosion. It was such a Western.
You're talking about the Big Bang?
Yeah, the Big Bang. Yeah, I mean, there's such a Western concept, and
but you're saying that is obviously immersed in a much larger thing that we don't really
I'm
know
not
or
saying it is or
understand.
isn't. I'm just saying is that there are other ways of seeing the Big Bang, which is that time is cyclical, and over extraordinary expanses of what we call time, and that it is like everything else we see in the universe. It ebbs and flows, it dies, it's born, and that our concept of time is a very Western one, based on, the observation of the Big Bang. I'm not arguing with that observation. What I'm saying is culture says that, yep, Big Bang, that happened, and, that'll that's a whole cycle on the universe, and then it happens again, and then it happens again, which is kind of mind-boggling when you think about it. But it's also meant to convey to all of us, and to myself, for sure, to relax a little bit. In other words, we're part of this extraordinary journey, and we're going to come here, and then we're going to go. We leave. I mean, our body anyway, and to just open that up, because you read and hear and see, that we don't have much more time. If we don't do this, we're going to all be screwed and all that sort of stuff. It doesn't mean there's not an urgency with that we must have in order to address human suffering. And to me, global warming is about human suffering, and it's the suffering of all creatures on the planet. And that we're not only engendering it, but we're also speeding that up. And then we feel that ourselves, as families, as people, as women, as children. And it's freaky. It's really freaky to feel that, to go to sleep with that, to wake up with it, or to ignore it, which is oftentimes what people do, because they choose things that are distractive and addictive in order to blot it out. And I just suggest that there's another way of looking at time in our passage, and that can be imbued with grace and kindness and patience and understanding as to what other people are experiencing. But it doesn't mean we have to do that.
Yeah, exactly. Another quote from the book, kind of reflecting what you're saying. Each moment is the fruit of 40,000 years. The minute-winning days, like flies, buzz home to death, and every moment is a window on all of time. Um, you say distract us, with social media and addictive stuff. Partly, probably, at least for me, it's just because it's hard to hold that thought. It's a big, vast thing to hold. The idea that time is much more massive than we can picture. We're much smaller in it. It goes. It's in cycles and not waves. And our role here is, we're almost just this thing flying through space to briefly experience these endless pleasures and delights and senses, and to contribute to them, as you said, with patience and with kindness and with generosity and so on. And that's it. I mean, assuming that's it. And then we go into the soil and we become a tree, or we get reborn as another form of sentient life.
and we don't know. And what happens? And I feel like it's more about patience and kindness to self and other. So if we're here for our short time, it's a very short time that we are in our body. Who do we want to be during that time?
Mm-hmm.
And what are we going to do? What will we? People often have said this. What will we remember on a deathbed? And all the things.
The legacy question is pervasive.
It is, but in a larger context, that you're, this idea that you're dead, you're gone forever. We come and go. I mean, whatever we is, I don't know what we is. By the way, I'm not a scholar. I'm not a teacher. I'm not a religious figure. I'm not. But I think it quickens the mind, and it's just a matter of time before somebody actually sees themselves. And I just feel like those teachings, these ancient teachings, 4,000 or 5,000 years old, and in some cases longer, provide a way of being on the world at this time that is sane. It makes us more sane, more calm. It doesn't make us inactive or indifferent, not at all, to the contrary. And so, what are those touch points that would enliven us in a time when almost everything that's coming at us is making us smaller?
Wow. Yeah, what a great question. It reflects back to me something I got from a conversation with former Surgeon General Vivek Murthy, who says that exact question: Does this make me bigger or smaller? As a directional guide, because he feels that all decisions are based in love or fear, if I'm paraphrasing him properly. But patience and kindness to self, pause there before you get to other. Those are two things I would like to have more of. I don't know how to learn them. I mean, you're, a lot older than me. I'm assuming some of this comes with being a student, a curious student of the world, and more times or rotations here. But patience and kindness to self, that'd be a great place to start. That'd be those are, I don't know, you have kids. Are there things that you tell them to do to try to imbue some of these things, or lessons that you share with them as a father I'm a dad as well. I would like my kids to be speaking to themselves better than I speak to myself. And the risk, of course, is that when I say comments about myself, which I do all the time publicly in my house, I catch myself, if I'm lucky, and then I see my kids saying that, and I'm like horrified that I've put, thoughts into their heads about so a food that isn't good to eat, or a show that isn't good to watch, or a candy that they shouldn't be eating, or something they shouldn't be doing, or they should be doing. Like a lot of shoulds, a lot of right and wrong, a lot of good and bad, a lot of this is healthy, this is not, until I read your book, and then you say even oat milk and protein bars are ultra processed. I'm like, oh shit, Paul, once again, like I should just be eating apples and celery, man. Like I am still screwed on that. The point is, I don't know how much I don't know, but that would be a wonderful place to start, is patience and kindness to self. I'd love your advice on that.
I have no advice. I have no advice on being a parent, either. I do think it's all about embodiment, and my kids are really amazing, and I don't take any credit for that at all. And
really, my kids are really amazing, and I don't take any credit for that.
No. And no, I don't. And yeah, Mano, just I don't know. That's a.
But you said it's all about embodiment, so you're saying something by saying that, which is, you can't pour from an empty vessel. Put the oxygen mask on yourself first. Like there's the don't do as I say, you're gonna do as I do. There's this is what your type is saying.
Yeah, well, it's a mixed family, and so it's so interestingly complex, that I don't think it's something so easily dispatched in a conversation.
Okay.
Yeah.
I hear you. Okay, let's move to your third book. I got a few closing questions on that, and then I want to be respectful of your generosity here on your time. So we're going to close things off with a very interesting and unusual book that, of course, like many on the show, I had not heard of before. And you give me a couple by him, but it is Kokoro, Kokoro, by Lafcadio Hearn.
Lafcadio Hearn. And the book is called, in Japanese, Kokoro.
Kokoro, okay, which means, I think, heart.
Yes, it does.
Okay, Lafcadio Hearn. It was published in 1896 by Houghton Mifflin. I have a shiny covered paperback with no details, by the way, on my copy of author or anything. Just a downward kind of sepia pencil drawing of the author on the cover. He lived from 1850 to 1904. At that time, it's pretty amazing that this guy lived from the islands off of Greece to Dublin to London to Cincinnati to New Orleans, and then he died in Tokyo at age 54. He's best known for bringing the culture and literature of Japan to the Western world, the inner culture, the mind culture, the psychological culture. 15 essays are in here examining the inner spiritual life of Japan. Dewey Decimal has this got an interesting one, 915.204 for history and geography /travel/Asia/Japan. Paul, tell us about your relationship with, I know it's not just Kokoro, but the broader work of Lafcadio Hearn, Hearn.
I think because I grew up in Berkeley, and there was a big interest at that time in Zen, Buddhism, Suzuki Roshi, Alan Watts. It was on a lot of people's minds, and there was a lot of talk, about it, and practice too. And so I became very curious about Japan myself, about Buddhism. And so Lafcadio Hearn was, I forget his racial thing, but he married
Ionian Islands was where he was from.
I mean, he was an American, and he married, of all things, a black woman, at that time. And then at one point they go to Japan. I can't imagine a gaijin is what Japanese call foreigners, a gaijin with a black wife going to Japan and integrating. Integrating into the culture. But somehow he did get under it in and started to, I don't know who his teachers were or who he was, talking to, how quickly he learned Japanese, which is both a very difficult and simple language, depending how you look at it. Simply, I don't mean simplistic, but I mean, and started writing about Japan. And for me, it was just the beginning of understanding, reading about Japan and learning more about it, and then ending up eventually spending time there myself and living there. So I think that it was the first book I read. Kokoro means heart, and it's a very heart-based culture in that sense. I mean, the way Japanese relate to each other, the way they speak, the way they interact and respect not only each other but also the living world. That is nature. And so for me, it was just like it was the doorway in. It's not that the door was that important, but that was the one that showed up for me.
I know you don't dispense didactic advice. I get it. I hear you, and I understand that. And the way you communicate is really eloquent and beautiful and sort of post-didactic in a lot of sense. This book on Japan turned my mind to my first trip there. I went there once. I was in my early 20s. Of course, lots of things about the culture struck me. The food was one of the biggest points where I had, culture awareness and clash. You read a lot about food, and you read a lot about food and carbon. On page 48, you say there are an estimated 300,000 edible plants, but less than 200 are commonly used by humans. And today, 12 plants and 5 animals provide 75% of the human diet. On page 51, you echo something you mentioned earlier. We became culinary hamsters in the treadwheel of supermarket food, glistening fat-infested desserts, sugary ketchup, salty, heart-eroding snacks, exploit innate appetites that are there to protect us, not kill. Nutritional literacy was reduced to intense taste only, salty, fatty, and sweet. For 99.5% of time, humans have lived on the planet. Fat, sugar, and salt were difficult to obtain. I'm looking at a very healthy and vital man on his 80th trip around the sun. I'm just curious, and I've been looking on the internet for this. I couldn't find it. How do you eat? What are your what are your principles for yourself on your diet, and how do you think about that?
Oh, I mean, I eat very simply. I eat vegetables and fruit and some grain and protein, usually small, either eggs or small fish like sardines. It's like, but I mean, I'll do soups, that are Japanese, with miso and uh, sea vegetables and root vegetables and, white miso. And then sometimes I'll just poach some fish in it, and that's a treat for me. But I just eat very simply. I don't
Yeah,
have any dietary restrictions per se, no
yeah.
any dietary directives to anybody else.
Well, here I am at age 46, kind of following, the emerging longevity movement, which is saying to sort of start your day with these 10 pills and end your day with these 10 pills and make sure you have this many grams of protein and make sure, it's so, what do you make of this longevity fascination, the idea that's emerging very quickly that we're not going to die?
It's just another form of narcissism. And I don't take any pills at all. I don't take any vitamins. I don't take, I don't swallow things like that. I chew. And if there's something that, like berberine or something I want to take for whatever reason, I'll chew it. If you don't, if your body,
Berberine, sorry?
berberine, berberine, berberine. But if you, um, want to take something that shows up as a capsule or a pill, eat it. Don't swallow it, because your body, your tongue, your mouth is absolutely brilliant on what it will accept and not take.
Mm.
And you
How do you eat vitamin D?
don't
Or
bypass it. Well, I don't. I have the sun. You know, it's like, why buy something that shines on you? And sometimes for days it doesn't, for sure, but your body's very resilient that way. But,
yeah.
but
So you're saying rather than taking pills for creatine and vitamin C and whey protein, get it from the thing it's made in and eat that and chew that.
well, whey protein is not a vitamin. It's actually just protein from milk. Okay. So that's a choice. Some people need more protein, some need less. But when I was early 20s, I knew that being a vegan was come on, get out of here, the smartest thing to do. Everything else was kind of stupid. And so I was living in Boston. I had the access to Harvard Library and BU Library. And so I researched it, and then what I discovered was the opposite, which is there's no third generation vegan in the history of the human species. No third generation vegan. And I challenge people, if there was one, find it. I'm happy to be wrong on that one. But so then I said, well, why? Come on, let's figure this one out and so forth. But then you look latitudinally, if you're, living in the far north, the Nunavutts and so forth. I mean, what's your diet? It's going to be primarily seafood. It's going to be, fish, and it can be seals, it could be other things. And you do get some berries and stuff, in the summer, there's a short period when you can eat those. And then you go back to pretty much a solid carnivore diet, pretty much. And, these people lived there for, 10,000, 20,000 years. And then seem to do okay. Okay. And so then you go down equatorially, as you go down, to, India, places that are very warm and where there's a very abundant amount of natural food and trees and this, you could live almost off the land without even cooking or buying anything. And there's a lot of sweet foods, fruits and mangoes and things like that. And there you do find people who are very close to vegan, for sure. They'll maybe eat some milk, cream, maybe not. Maybe they'll eat some honey. Maybe they'll, whatever. It depends on the religion almost, But so here's the big difference, Neil. So I thought, okay, intestines. So if you live where you can only survive on animal food, you're just like a dog, intestinally speaking, which is your intestines need to be short. That's who basically evolved to be there, because you don't want to leave meat in your intestines for very long. It putrefies and it'll poison you. Okay. So if you live equatorially, the food density is not there like it is, in the north in terms of animal food. So you're eating foods that are less nutrient dense, right? And the intestinal length can be 3 times longer than somebody who lives in the north, because it takes that long before the intestine is able to get all the nourishment out of these foods. All right. I'm speaking sort of.
No, I love it. I love
Yeah.
it. I want it. I need it. I'm asking. Yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of what to eat, how much protein, how little, what kind of protein, or vegan, all that sort of stuff, it depends on where your biological inheritance,
Yeah.
Yeah. And you don't.
Mine's near Lahore in India, and I live in a formerly frozen tundra land. Hence, my allergies are all skittery in the falls and the springs. Like I think my nasal passages and sinuses are like, what the hell is going on here?
Right. So there's no question you can be a vegan. There's monks in monasteries who are vegan, no question about it. But in terms of reproduction, find me a 3rd generation vegan at all, but find me one that reproduced. Didn't, in the history of humanity as we know it, and so forth. So pro-vegan, anti-vegan, everything in between and so forth, it really depends on place and, who you are and your physiology.
And it's not like you're drawing upon a certain book or a dictum or a guide. You are drawing upon the earth's natural producing.
Yeah. And you're also
food
not trying
around
to
where you live.
bypass it. You're not trying to outthink it. You're not trying to be smarter than your body. And so your body will tell you what to eat if you listen. But if you are coming at it from a conceptual point of view, you're bypassing and overriding what your body is telling you.
How will your body tell you? What will you notice in your body?
What do you notice?
Well, you said your body will tell you what to eat if you listen, and I agree and love that phrase. And now I'm like, how do I learn to how do I unlearn what I've learned, and how do I learn how to listen to my body?
I don't know how you would, because I don't know your lifestyle, but I mean, the first thing I would do probably is not take pills and then see how you feel. Okay. And then you say, well, I don't feel good, or I feel fine, or I feel better. I mean, it's going to be some in that spectrum. And then you want to look at why you're taking this, supplement, this supplement, this supplement. Is it because you read something somewhere? Because somebody told
Doctor says I have low iron, take the iron pill. Doctor says I have low vitamin D, take the vitamin D pill. Influencer says everybody should take 5 grams of creatine. Helps with this, helps with brain health, helps with muscle. I take that. It's an array of sources that I'm trying to keep up with,
Yeah, and basically, I won't name the doctor, but he's well known. They also sell the products. And so they benefit from the idea that somehow,
That's part of the issue, is that we live under the saran wrap bubble of late stage capitalism. And so it's
right,
hard to puncture that seal and see outside of the matrix. Always
right,
about our news. It's a theme here about our elders, about people that are making a change in the world because they're quiet and they are not on the cover of the papers, about our food supply. It's disheartening. That's why I love your stuff. That's why books. I mean, look, read Carbon. Like read Paul's latest book. It is so magnificently eye opening. It's like a flower blossoming in front of you as you read it, and it's on my reread permanent. My permanent reread shelf. I have a shelf of books I just want to keep reading through my whole life.
that's
It's on there besides Siddhartha, and but that's why I'm loving talking to you. And also I happened to notice that, all three of your formative authors, I know there's many. You were one of the generous guests who, when I asked about this question, you give me a list, and Seth got into this, and others who are massive voracious readers of this. But, James Baldwin lived until his 60s. This guy lived until his 50s. Thomas Wolfe lived into his 30s. I'm looking at you. I'm like, you're thriving. You're healthy. I've interviewed a few people of your age and experience. I didn't interview, but met a Zen Buddhist priest last year, and I said, "How old are you?" And he said, "No, don't ask how old I am. Ask, when was I born in this life?" And I wondered if you had principles or precepts that you have used to guide yourself or steady yourself directionally, or in other ways through your healthy and productive, very 60s and 70s and soon to be 80s, outliving, I will point out,
yeah.
many of your
Well,
inspirants.
I mean, I was just making it up as I went along and just trying to figure it out by listening to my body. I've never had health insurance, which is weird, I know, but and I did go to a hospital once when I something happened suddenly, and I was chewing some vegetables that were less raw-ish, and one got stuck in my esophagus. And so I had to go and have them push it down. So I have been in a hospital that way, but
But you talk about it like it's like this one instance long ago. I was in a hospital this morning getting a picture of my heart taken with iodine flooded through it. I mean, I hang out there.
Yeah, no, I don't. I have no
Yeah, I
relation
love this.
to the medical.
But it's not just health. Is there something you're doing in terms of purpose or time, or you're outside? We get this from you. It comes through in spades. Vitamin D comes from outside. You're especially rugged terrain, outside a lot, outside in nature, talking to the mountains. Huge ingredient that is, I'm sorry to say, but I would wager, unless you're listening to this while on a walk, most of us are like a fraction of a percent of what you're doing on outside. I've read that the percentage of time our kids are spending outside is currently the lowest in history.
Yeah.
Where kids today spend 7% of their days outside, which I know you can't multiply percentages, but if you multiply 7% times 7 days a week, it means it takes kids a whole week to spend half a day outside now.
Right.
Recesses have been tightened. Lunch hours have been shortened. What used to be they'd come home with 2 hours of outside time at school. Now they come home with like 45 to 75 minutes. Like I'm just saying, I've interviewed a woman about this topic. And of course, in the evenings, they have 7 extracurriculars and piles of homework. Never mind the addictive tendency of all the screens that we feed them to. As Jonathan Haidt, past guest, said on 103, we serve to them as old as they can lie, because this hilariously fake age 13 limit on TikTok and Instagram, if you just say you're 12, it doesn't check. It doesn't matter. It doesn't care. It wants you anyway. So what an uphill battle just being outside is. Now on the food, I take great inspiration. And then I'm asking you, and this is kind of a closing question, but you just ooze wisdom. So I'm looking foolish by saying, what other tools or principles or precepts have you used to guide your life for the last few decades, and will you continue? Because I know a friend of yours, Jane Goodell, just died. And she was 91, and your blurbs are from like luminaries, right? Like Cornfield is in your book, and it's clear to me that you surround yourself with the sages of our era, and
Yeah, and Rick Roll, Rich Roll, I mean, is one of your guests.
yeah,
Guy,
he's amazing. Yeah.
really amazing. I would say, first of all, back to children, we're creating ultra processed children. Okay. And because they have to be smarter and better, and they have to get ahead. They're thinking in junior high school about what universities and colleges they're going to apply to. I mean, with, getting ready and studying those universities and who gets in, who doesn't, and all that sort of stuff. I mean, there goes childhood, So childhood is a teaching and learning, is how children learn. They can't learn just by being outside. They also need to be with elders. Elders are people who have spent a lifetime learning about self and other and place, and in a way that is admirable, and that children gravitate to. I mean, I never saw, not that I saw many times, but children love Jane Goodall. Well, why? Well, not because of what she did with primates. It's because who she was, her presence. They wanted to be there. And so where are those elders? What are they doing? And Paul Goodman is the one who famously, in Growing Up Absurd, talked about, we do an interesting thing in this culture. We put the elders off in rest homes, and we put the children into nursery schools and things. In other words, the children need attention and love and care from the elders, and the elders need something to care and to pay attention to.
Yeah.
and they're completely separated.
I mean, I'll completely agree. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
so opposite to how I grew up. I mean, obviously, I'm first generation kind of in Canada Indian, but just one generation above. Of course, in Indian communities, you'd have the oldest and the youngest living together.
Yeah, absolutely.
But even now, as I say it, if I picture my own parents in their at age 80 and 75 knocking on my door and saying, "Hey, one of us died. Can the other one live with you?" I have a gulp in my chest knowing my life and my lifestyle and my partner and that world being so
yeah.
different than the one I now live in. So it's hard for me I embrace it mentally, but
Yeah. No, it's
you know,
very, very difficult now. We don't live that way. There's too much money, and that it's kind of like stepping on a fork, a rake really just, it hits us. We have the money, and now we pay and pay and pay, not in monetary terms, but in so many other ways in terms of our life, and our relationships too, whether it's our parents or children or others. And it's very difficult to be wealthy in this culture at this time. And that sounds like ridiculous term, because everybody's trying to be more wealthy. But I think that actually it works against us.
because
Well, look
it's
at
like
in
a
India,
rake.
and you're Indian, but hey, families used to live together. They used to sleep in one room together. For goodness sakes, and what was that like? What was that?
Mm.
What happened to the people that had that sort of attention and warmth and connection, to their family? There's a continuity there that, doesn't exist anymore in the United States.
Yeah.
Not that it ever did in the same way as it does in India, or I don't know what's happening in India now, but, it's not that should be true, but we definitely balkanized, family, uh, due to money. And well, I'm just going on and on and preaching. I should shut up, but I'm just saying that, the beauty of a child, the beauty of an elder, should not be separated, should not be, pushed apart. They should be together. And I think we'd have a healthier, kinder world.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
But you have 9-year-olds running around with phones, Hello. Yeah.
Yeah, and the 1950s life insurance movement to advertise retirement as something you work towards so
Yeah,
that
right.
you deserve nobody. There was this active living theory, I'm sure you're familiar. Nobody wanted to retire. It was on it. This was a marketed thing for decade after decade, to the point where the people that said I want to actively retire is now the majority, but it never used to be this way. There was active living theory. And then of course that created the Dell, the Sunshine State, and the, Phoenix, Arizona, the rise of these
Yeah.
places that are separate from ours. And yeah, we are, again, it rises back up to it rises back up to the manner in which we live. But through your wisdom, I will say, and you have an ability to sort of see that since the days in Berkeley, when you sat in that bed and you read those books and you said, I feel like I'm an outsider here, to today, where, post being captured and driven down a highway by the Ku Klux Klan, and living in Japan and traveling around the world and creating these incredible movements, not environmental per se, as those of living and breathing through wisdom and elders. I met you through a commencement speech that I still think about all the time, that you gave 16 years ago, and it's touched me so deeply. The book Carbon is truly a life-changing read, and one that I highly recommend. So you are pointing us to this, as you say, this large movement that's just not in the news. There's a lot of people. And by the way, when you look at those charts, the newest generation, they're using cell phones and social media less. It's like one of the best charts I've ever seen. It's going down, and the schools are starting to ban them. And there's a rise of the local food movement. And so we can feel together that, yeah, we know, we're smart enough to know that what does us poorly over the long term must, as you've put at the beginning of your book, must be extracted. We have to get rid of things that don't serve us.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have a lot of faith in humanity, just as long as I read the headlines. And I really do. And that's what I was talking about with the Alliance, actually. We don't see how extraordinary, generous, kind, brilliant people are. I mean, we do in our personal life, who maybe amongst our friends or this or that. I'm not trying to describe anybody else's life. I'm just saying on a macro level, it doesn't come through. And because it doesn't have scale. It doesn't, and people rather read about some ridiculous thing that Donald Trump said yesterday, because it gets their, whatever going.
And getting their whatever going is all he's going for.
That's all he's going for. He's just trying to be in the news every single day.
And if there's a FIFA headline for 5 days, well, then he's got to talk about canceling the sports.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, he'll go where the headline is.
Yeah.
Tail wags the dog, as that old movie used to say, right? Wag the dog, I think, or
Yeah.
it's or Infinite Jest, right? David Foster Wallace warned
possibly,
us about this in 1996. The Total Entertainment Forever World. So we're aware of it, and that's why we listen to 2-hour podcasts with wise people like you, and we read your books and we follow your work, and you help us connect to the deeper connected roots that connect all living things.
Yeah. I mean, we just have to realize that we have an earworm in chief, as our political leader in the United States. And it's your ear, and you have choices.
Paul Hawken, thank you so much for this gift. Thank you so much for coming to this.
I love the way you do it. I love the way you not crawl, but you move into the inner spaces of the people you interview, and who oftentimes are writers too, and but people of real interest and real, a lot of really thoughtful people. But I love the fact that I didn't understand it at first. 3 books, okay, here. But now I actually do understand it. If we ever do it again, I'll give you 3 more books. But I really, really, really respect what you're doing, and I'm very grateful to it. Yeah.
Those words mean more than you can imagine. Thank you so much, Paul. touched, and this is a real honor to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ned.
Hey everybody, it's just me, just Neil again, hanging out in my basement, wearing my Paul Hawken inspired dress shirt. I have this dress shirt from Dan the tailor. Some of you will remember Dan the tailor from chapter 94, where we hung out in his store in downtown Toronto, 18 Waits. Well, he sold me this shirt. And if you're looking at me on YouTube right now, you can see fungi, you can see plants, you can see flowers, and there's also these gnomes. And I was at a family holiday party, and one of Leslie's cousins has a baby, and the baby says like 2 words, Mama, Dada, and Santa. I guess it's 3 words. And she kept pointing at my shirt saying, Santa, 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 because there's a couple characters on here that kind of look like Santa. So I'm feeling, inspired by Paul. I mean, he kind of brings the mood down a bit, but necessarily so because, of course, what are we talking about? What are we talking about? We're talking about Venezuela and Trump taking over, countries. And we're talking about, authoritarianism. And we're talking about, what are we talking about? We're not talking about life on this planet and the long-term trajectories that we're seeing and experiencing in it. But if you go outside, you're probably like, there used to be more chimney swifts above my house last year. And yeah, this winter isn't really as cold as it was. I remember when we used to do the rink at the park, and it used to be every winter. And now it's so often. And now it's like, it used to be big snowbanks. You know what I mean? I'm like not that old, and I can notice these trends. And of course, I can see them, and I rely on somebody like Paul to kind of expose me to them. So many quotes jump out to me from this conversation. I usually do 3. I might have to do 9 or 6 right here. How about, the living world is extraordinarily cooperative. Cooperative actually is a kind of a small term for what they're doing, because exquisitely interactive and symbiotic is probably a better description. So the living world is exquisitely interactive and symbiotic. I love that. So much about colonialism and history is all about capitulation and taking over and winning and being overbearing, but it's not the way it really works. Everyone is an environmentalist because they live in the environment. I thought that was an interesting way of putting it. Really, he's kind of refusing that term, which is sometimes the more you look into something, the more you don't like that term, right? That happens a lot. He has this quote on walking that I really love. I think when you're walking, you're entering into a non-static relationship, and most of our relationship with nature is static. I was reading an interview in the Financial Times this past weekend with the former head of AI of Meta, and apparently his ouster or his leaving, because he was reporting to some 25-year-old that Mark Zuckerberg hired for $100 million or something. And this guy's old school. This guy's a, Jeffrey Hinton type character from University of Toronto from the 70s. And he was like, my big argument to Mark Zuckerberg was that all of our LLMs, which he thinks are terrible, large language models, he's like, none of them understand the natural world. That was his argument. That was led to his ouster. That's what he's starting as his own personal startup. How does AI understand the natural world? I don't understand what he's talking about, but I like the idea that this guy who's kind of running AI for the world's, second or third largest company, his big ouster was because he thought AI doesn't understand the natural world, which is kind of true, right? I mean, it makes sense. It's a really long quote, so it's hard to read it, but he has this whole point, Paul, about how we use these male-dominated kind of violent images to talk about climate, like tackling climate change, fighting climate change. And, there's a problem with that, combating things, because it creates, in his words, heroic imagery of complete nonsense, because the biosphere and the climate are absolutely inseparable. You can't beat it. You are part of it. It's like saying we want to conquer life, More specifically, Paul says, we have a crisis. I couldn't agree more, but it's not a climate crisis. It's a human crisis. It's a relationship crisis, understanding, greed, violence, and power crisis. Global warming is the symptom. Such a good point. Is it global warming is the problem, or is it we want and need way more stuff to have a higher quality of living, so we need more boats, dispersing more gas in the oceans and killing things to get get furniture to our houses. Like that's kind of, is that climate the problem? Or is it like, late stage capitalism and crazy income inequality? These things kind of exacerbate the issue. Global warming is the symptom. That's the quote. Global warming is the symptom. And then he says, I suggest there's another way of looking at time and our passage, and that can be imbued with grace and kindness and patience and understanding as to what other people are experiencing. Those are the big things, right? I think novels give us that. That's kind of what gets missed in nonfiction a lot, I think, is that, unless you're reading a book about grace or patience or something or understanding, it's really the feeling of human emotions in specific situations that novels can sort of share with us in its unique way. Paul says, I have no advice on being a parent. My kids are really amazing, and I don't take any credit for that. I thought that was kind of interesting from somebody who's so deeply connected to the earth that whether his kids end up great or not great, or however you define that, he doesn't take any credit for that. And then the last quote, this kind of probably falls in line with a lot of stuff we've been talking about on the show with our conversations with Jonathan Haidt and with Jenny Urich and with Lenore Skenazy. He says, we are creating ultra-processed children. When he goes on, and I won't include this as part of the quote, but he talks about, they got to be smarter and they got to be better. They got to get ahead in junior high school. They got to apply to college and universities at young ages. So you end up, creating ultra-processed children. I actually toured a private school in Toronto with my wife and my kid. He didn't end up wanting to be interested in it, but it was like, I honestly felt like I was walking into a pamphlet. I felt like I was walking into a pamphlet. The music, the setup, the design, the speech the kids gave. I was like, has this been edited 12 times by administration? This just feels like everyone in here ends up kind of samey, And then when you talk to the grads and where they go into and what they study, it's like, finance. And I had no judgment on finance. I have lots of friends in finance. I have no problem with finance as an idea, but it's like we're all going into just the managing of capital and moving money. That's not what's happening with makers. Jonathan Fields, who was a guest back in chapter 28, he's the host of Good Life Project, a wonderful podcast. He's a good friend of mine. He just gave a wonderful TED Talk. We should put that in the show notes. He just gave a wonderful new TED Talk. I think where he lives in Boulder or Boise. I think he lives in Boulder, but I think that's where he gave the TED Talk. And it's all about rekindling the making aspects of our identities and our personalities, hands in the dirt, working with your hands. Martellus Bennett told us that too, right? Honestly, we were on a holiday trip. We went to France, and I was in this tiny wooden, almost outhouse, in nature. And, it was just cold water and kind of a dirty toilet. And as I closed the door, there was this cross stitch, of a mountain scene. And I could just feel in that cross stitch, I was like, somebody spent time, doing needlepoint. I think is needlepoint cross stitch the same thing? Needlepoint and creating this big image. It's probably been there for 50 years and no one's ever moved it when this bathroom was a really nice bathroom. And you know what my compulsion was? I wanted to do it. I could just feel my hands unclenching from cell phone fingers. And I was like, oh yeah, how fun would it be to do needlepoint? And of course I was reminded of my own TED Talk 16 years ago now, where I talk about Rosie Greer, the NFL player who created the book Rosie Greer's Needlepoint for Men, which I thought, where he's needlepointing his own face on the cover. Needlepoint, bring back needlepoint. Not sure how we ended up there, but that was just the rant I went on. Lots of quotes from the eminent and wise and sagacious Paul Hawken. Of course, he also gave us 3 more books to add to our top 1,000. We have number 545, Go Tell It on the Mountain by James Baldwin. Number 544, Look Homeward, Angel by Thomas Wolfe. Not to be confused with Tom Wolfe. That's Thomas Wolfe, Thomas. Maybe Tom Wolfe later on went by Tom because of this guy. And number 543, Kokoro by Lafcadio Hearn, Hearn. 3 more books, no asterisks added to our top 1,000 on today, the snow moon of 2026, February 1st, 2026 at 10:09 p.m. We will be back, of course. I wanted to say another day in February because there's always 1 month that has a couple full moons. But it's not February, people, and it's not March. It's March 3rd. We're going to be back. It's going to be a fun conversation. Stick around, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. Until next time, you are what you eat and you are what you read. Thanks so much for listening to 3 Books.